Good morning. It's nice to be back. Talking about the Sandokai, and I was listening very carefully to the words this morning because I speak about it. And then I was officiating, and I was supposed to go to the altar at one point, but I was really focusing on the words of the chant, and I didn't do it. It wasn't until later, and I realized the officiating was incomplete for the Sandokai, but I was thinking of the word that says fire is hot and water is wet. So we, as you know, Roshi Shinka and I were away for a little over 2 weeks on vacation, and we really learned that fire is hot because we went across the desert to California, and we were in that heat dome with our camper shell, which is outside the room here on our truck. Fortunately, the air conditioning worked well inside the camper and inside the truck, but we arrived at some places it was just too hot to take the dog out and burn her feet. She walked on the ground as I quickly would plug in the electricity in the water, and we would retreat into the camper, turn on the air conditioning. It's miserable. But we did have a good time in San Diego, our destination, saw family, and it was cool there. We were near the ocean. But Yugen's daughter lives in Phoenix, and I grew up in Phoenix, and I remember every summer it would get up to like 115, but I think Phoenix this summer has had triple digit temperatures for 30 days in a row or 31 days in a row. My friends still have friends who live there, but we only encountered 117 degrees on our trip. It was in Needles, California. If you know anything about Needles, it's in the middle of the Mojave Desert. And so we returned here, and of course, I heard on the radio that we're having our monsoon season now, and we did last Tuesday, so I wasn't able to sit because it just poured buckets, and we got flooded, and we had a window open, and my office got flooded. And, we had to turn on our pumps, otherwise the Sendo would have gotten flooded. So we went from fire is hot to water is wet in short order. But those aren't the lines I'm going to talk about today on the identity of relative and absolute. I'm going to talk about these lines, which this is my third talk on the identity of relative and absolute. It says, each and all, the subjective and objective spheres are related and at the same time independent. Related yet working differently, though each keeps its own place. Form makes the character and appearance different. Sounds distinguish comfort and discomfort. The dark makes all words one. The brightness distinguishes good and bad phrases. So for these first four lines about the subjective and objective spheres are related and at the same time independent, I have a couple of other translations, one from Bernie Glassman, which says, all spheres, every sense and field intermingle even as they shine alone, interacting even as they merge, yet keeping their place in expression of their own. So it's similar, but it adds some more perspective or nuance to it. And then Shunryu Suzuki Roshi also had his translation, which said, all objects of the senses interact and yet do not. Interacting brings involvement, otherwise each keeps its place. So it's a little more cryptic and maybe a little more obscure. So the words used here of spheres or senses, the Japanese word is mon, which means gates. Like the gateless gate is called the Mumon Kon. Mumon means mu is no, like Joshua's mu. Mumon is no gate. And so here in this chant, the same word as gates. And so the senses in their fields are like gates, that go in and out of our face, all of our eyes and ears and nose and mouth. And there's a couple of well-known koans about these gates. And in the Blue Cliff Record, case 9, the monk asked Master Joshu, "What is Joshu?" And Joshu replied, "East Gate, West Gate, North Gate, South Gate." So Joshu, the same Joshu from Does a Dog Have Buddha Nature or Not? And Joshu said, "Moo." He lived in a town, and the town he took his name Joshu from the name of the town. A lot of the Zen masters took their name from the place where they were residing. And so he was famous for they called it his lips and tongue Zen. And he used it to express both the town and who he is. And the gates are our connection to the world. They're related at the same time, they're independent. So, see, each one of us is different. And because we're different, that's what we have in common. Okay? So, we are all one body. So, Joshu is saying that these 4 gates of the gated town of Joshu are also the senses. And phenomena continually come in and out, but we don't own or have senses. They're gateways. That being the case, so we are not attached to them. They're just gateways. There's no self here, and that's our true nature. In the Book of Equanimity, case 38, Rinzai addressed the assembly saying, "Here in this lump of red flesh, there's a true person of no rank. He's always leaving and entering the gates of your face. If you have not witnessed him as a fact, or her as a fact, look. So each phenomena, whatever it is, affects everything else, and at the same time, it's affected by everything else. Yet it keeps its own place, so it maintains its individuality, even though we interact constantly. I'm affecting you and you're affecting me. We still have our identity. So what this Sandokai is looking at reality from relative and absolute perspectives and saying that how they interact are not different. So I just want to read another quote. This is from Master Dogen in his fascicle called the Genjo Koan. He said, "Gaining enlightenment is like the moon reflecting in the water. The moon does not get wet, nor is the water disturbed. Although its light is extensive and great, the moon is reflected even in a puddle an inch across. The whole moon and the whole sky are reflected in a dewdrop in the grass. In one drop of water, enlightenment does not disturb the person, just as the moon does not disturb the water. A person does not hinder enlightenment, just as a dewdrop does not hinder the moon in the sky. The depth of the drop is the height of the moon." So he's saying that whatever our realization is, We don't disturb it and it doesn't disturb us. So whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever you think does not disturb your true self. So the true self is always there like the moon, but if we rile up the water, then the reflection, isn't as clear, or if we muddy the water. So the problem is that we let what we hear, what we think, and what we see disturb us. And thus we exchange our self-grasping for our true self. So in the first step in Zazen, Soyen Shoku wrote, make a searching analysis of yourself. Realize that your body is not your body. It's part of the whole body of all sentient beings. Your mind is not your mind. It is but a constituent of all minds. Your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, your hands, and your feet are not merely your individual belongings, but one in joint ownership with all sentient beings. You simply call them yours and others. You cling to your own being and consider others separate from you. This is nothing but a baseless delusion of yours. So thus the distinctiveness of phenomena is not disturbed by their merging into one, nor is the merging hindered by the fact that distinctiveness is retained. So, like Bernie Glassman said, all spheres, every sense and field intermingle even as they shine alone, interacting even as they merge, yet keeping their place in expressions of their own. So, though each keeps its own place as additional connotations, each sense object is absolute as it is. And being absolute, all sense objects are the same because they're each absolute. So consider these examples. The notion of the self is just a sense object. That is, it's a thought perceived by the brain. And the Sandokai, or the identity of relative and absolute, is saying that everything, no matter what it is just a dharma or a phenomena which appears and disappears. That applies to all ideas, concepts, and notions. So the notion of a unicorn is just as absolute as the image of a cottonwood tree. The notion. Okay? Both are dharmas. You may think that the image of a cottonwood tree is real, whereas the notion of a unicorn is unreal, but both are dharmas. Both are nothing but the conditioned result of various interminglings, senses and objects coming together or co-arising. So that's what's going on. So the same is true of our notion of self, which is as real as our notion of a unicorn. It's just a notion. Okay? So the identity of relative and absolute, it goes further than the Heart Sutra in clarifying the relationship of the absolute and relative. In the Heart Sutra, it just says form is emptiness and emptiness is form. But here, it's a little more nuanced, looking at it from different perspectives. And I've been working for many weeks on a book on the 5 ranks of Tozan, and which is going to be published sometime, I hope, next year by Shambhala Publications. And the 5 ranks of Tozan are about the relative and the absolute, and they're a little more extensive. So in the Tozan scheme, when we say that the subjective and objective spheres, that describes the relative sphere, the relative alone. And when we say each keeps its own place, it's more absolute. That's the absolute. So it says the subjective and objective spheres are related and yet at the same time independent. They're related yet working differently, though each keeps its own place. So and are related and at the same time independent. That describes the absolute within the relative. And they're related yet working differently, which describes the relative within the absolute. And since the absolute is one body, anything we isolate within it is not relative, but the relative within the absolute. But in these positions, we have not left the dualistic realm. To say each and all the subjective and objective spheres are related at the same time independent is dualistic talking. They're saying they're this and they're that. Similarly, if we say each Dharma is the whole universe, we have to get rid of notions of relative and absolute and go to the position of no position. But so what this chant is doing is it's showing us this reality, and sometimes we see things from the relative, sometimes from the absolute. But what if we'd see it from no position? So when we let go of them as notions, we function out of both at the same time. So depending on what's appropriate for the situation, sometimes it's the absolute and sometimes it's a relative. But in any case, everything is our life as it is. So these notions of relative and absolute, they're just a temporary expedient to help us understand what's real and what's unreal. So there's live words and dead words, and Zen words aren't ordinary words. So let's look at the next 4 lines. 4 makes a character and appearance different. Sounds distinguish comfort and discomfort. So the Diamond Sutra says that this Dharma is equal, no high, no low. So each person is complete. So how can we be compared to anything? So let's take, for example, the sense of sight. The act of seeing is always the same. What we see is different, since we're not always looking at the same objects. So what we see is different, but the act of seeing is the same. The act of seeing, which is sameness, and what we see, which is difference, are inseparable. That inseparability is what we call seeing. So 4 makes the character in appearance different. And sounds distinguish comfort and discomfort. We could say the same thing about sound. about hearing, as I said about seeing. We all hear. The act of hearing is the same, but what we hear is different. And then our brain interprets it even after what we hear. Reminds me of a story of this immigrant family, and they had a son that they had sent to college. And he was living on the edge because they were poor. And he wrote home and asked for money. And the mother couldn't read English very well, so she went to one of her neighbors who spoke the same language she did. Maybe it was some Slavic language. And her neighbor was in a bad mood, and she snatched the letter and said, rah, 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 and gave it back to her. And the woman says, boy, if he's going to be like that, I'm not going to send him any money. And so then she got thinking about it the next day, and so she went back to the neighbor to read it, and the neighbor was in a better mood and said, no, 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 no. He says, oh, that's better. I'm going to send him the money. No. So hearing sounds, they distinguish comfort and discomfort, but it's just how we interpret them. It's just hearing, right? So that's what it says in the next line, that the dark makes all words one. So the dark is realized by letting go of the self. Without the self, everything is just what it is, existing independently of our notions and distinctions. So when we identify with seeing that is independent of subject and object, we just see. There's a koan that I know some of you have done. Absorbed in the flight of birds, she sees mindlessly. There's no separation between oneself and the birds. This is becoming the way. So it's just seeing. Just hearing, but we distinguish it. But the dark makes all words one. The brightness distinguishes good and bad phrases. At the same time we're seeing or hearing, see, the relative world impinges on us. At the same time that there are no distinctions, we perceive different character and appearance and comfort and discomfort. So there are differences in the identity of relative and absolute is telling us how to be comfortable in both the worlds of differences and the world of unity, the world of the relative and the world of the absolute, but not getting stuck in either one. It's so easy, we perceive things in certain ways. And then we get stuck to it, we get attached to it. And you all know the story of the blind man and the elephant, right? Yeah. They were arguing about what it was because one of them felt the leg and said it was like a tree. One felt the ear, said no, it was like a sheet of paper. Another felt the trunk, said it was like rope. They got into big arguments. I haven't seen it for many years, but there's a wonderful movie, Rashomon, Japanese movie, where there's an event. I can't remember if it was a robbery or a murder or something like that. And everybody's telling their story who were there, eyewitnesses. They're totally different stories. So what's true? See, we all have our filters, don't we, that we put up. And because of our filters, we see things a certain way. Sometimes we have rose-colored glasses on, and sometimes we have murky glasses on. So what's true? So how can we let go of that? We have to make an exhaustive examination of ourselves and see what we're holding on to. And how we always defend ourselves. If everybody else would behave the way you want them to, then it'd be a perfect world. So, as Uman said, every day is a good day. So everything is whole and complete as it is. See? That act of seeing is just seeing. And what we see, is what we see. And then we start judging it. And again, I just have to add that we just don't say that everything is perfect as it is. I mean, it's complete and whole, but, there is injustice. And I think I always remember the words of Elie Wiesel, who was a survivor of concentration camps and the Holocaust. And he said the opposite of love is not hate. He said the opposite of love is indifference. Yeah. So the same thing. To get engaged, to be engaged. So, but all of this is kind of conceptual, but still, it might make more sense to you now than it did before. Or maybe not. Maybe it's just confusing. Okay.